Welcome to r/JustNoHOA, where people tell stories about their crazy homeowner associations. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. Call the HOA because my yard is devaluing your house? Alright, I will have it clean by the inspection date. This is a story of my mother's. She has always been incredibly hard-headed, but this sticks out a lot from my teenage years. Once a year, she always had us pull everything out of the garage, lots of boxes, because my mom has a concerning amount of possessions, so we could go through it and clean/reorganize. This particular year, the couple who owned the house across from us, flippers, were in the process of selling their house. Unhappy with my mother's unsightly driveway covered in boxes soiling their good image, they made a call to the HOA. By the time my mother received the letter, the mess had been put away, but they decided to get her on a few other complaints, such as the bikes against the side of the house and the patchy gravel. She had 2 weeks to have everything up to standards. Petty and easily frustrated, my mother knew immediately who called, since the couple had come over and told her flat out with their renovations they were selling that house for way more any other house in this neighborhood, and would appreciate if she respected that by keeping her property on par. For the next 2 weeks, every box from that garage was in our driveway. The couch and the living room TV came next. This was early summer, so it was perfect weather to sit in your yard in your short shorts and sports bra. My mom made sure to wave and smile every time they brought someone over for a showing. The final step came at the end of that 2 weeks though. After the yard had been cleaned up and cleared by the HOA, my mom went to the local Walmart and bought a for sale sign. She wrote about 1/4 of their ridiculous asking price on it and finished it off with a big "SALT" written across the front and stuck it out in our yard. No clue what they ended up selling their house for, but it sat empty for a while, so I would assume it was below offer. I gotta say, if I had such a petty HOA, I would probably go crazy. Speaking of sales and everything, I'm curious, are you guys fans of flea markets? I remember when I was a kid we often went to those flea markets, but nowadays I feel it's kind of a waste of time because eBay pretty much replaced those. The next one is gonna be XXL, so be prepared. It's titled Taking on the Homeowners Association President. This happened when my wife and I first got married. My grandfather had passed just a couple months before and left me a very sizable inheritance with a note to make sure I use it smartly to start a good life for my wife and I. My father-in-law downs a real estate company that buys foreclosed houses and rehabs them, and he knew of a great starter home for my wife and I and agreed to pay to have it rehabbed with the understanding that we would pay him back when we were better established or after 2 years when we sold the house. So we bought the house and it took about 90 days to rehab it before we moved in. This is an important factor later on, so we finally moved into our house and had been there about 2 weeks when someone came and knocked on our door stating that they were the Homeowners Association president and asked for my landlord's contact information. I explained that we did not rent the home and that we were the owners, and then they followed that up by asking to speak with my parents. I reiterated again that I was the homeowner and asked them what they wanted. They explained that there was a HOA for the neighborhood and that I needed to sign the HOA rules and that I owed $90 prorated for my dues, but that they would give me 30 days to pay as a courtesy. However, they needed me to sign the rules right then. I told them I wanted to read and review them first before I agreed to sign anything, and they were extremely pushy about signing them right then. And by the way, that kind of sounds like making a contract with the devil. I refused and they told me that I had 7 days to sign them and explained that they have legal power to fine me if I do not turn in a signed copy in that time. I called my in-laws because I did not know anything about HOAs and asked them for their advice. My father-in-law got pissed, saying it should have been disclosed prior to the sale, but sometimes with HUD houses that gets missed. We agreed that the $30 per month fee was not horrible, especially because they did provide a really nice playground for the neighborhood. By the way, sorry to interrupt, but if anyone knows what HUD houses means, please let us know in the comments, because once again, a Google search did not help. Anyway, so I agreed and signed the rules, and there were a couple that seemed a little over the top to me, but I agreed anyway because from my understanding at the time I really did not have any choice. It seemed fine enough until about a month passed and we had a small housewarming party with a couple friends. Literally, there were less than 8 people there, including my wife and I. The house was small, but it had a nice deck, so we were out back having a small fire using a fire pit one of our friends had just given us when I heard someone knocking at the door. No, pounding, like a frickin' cop. I just went around the house and there was the HOA president with his car in front of my house with a yellow police light on top. Yes, I'm serious. I asked him how I could help him and he very sternly told me that I was in violation of the HOA rules by throwing a party outside of approved hours, 10 PM curfew, and that I needed to send my friends home or quietly take it inside, so I checked my watch and it was 10:05. I was amazed, but we took it inside regardless. The next day, the very next day, I had a letter from the HOA stating that it was my official warning for violation of the HOA rules by throwing a, and I quote, wild bonfire. That was a safety hazard while drinking. I literally had not drank at all. Whatever, I brushed it off and figured it was no big deal. Flash forward 6 to 9 months, we were hosting a teen group devotional for our church one afternoon and we were playing a game of football in the streets. We lived on a connecting street that got virtually no traffic and only had 2 houses on it, ours and the family across from us, whose kids were also playing in the game. All of a sudden I hear a police siren and see the yellow light flashing. HOA president gets out and tells us that we have to break it up immediately as it is a safety hazard because one of the kids could run over. I was fed up with him and told him that they were fine and that we have been watching for cars and that he was literally the first car we have seen and we had been playing for over an hour at that point. He insists and asked what would happen if an ambulance or police officer needed to come down that street to save someone's life. This was stupid because literally both streets we were connected to have entrances from the main road. I gave in and we went inside. Next day I get a letter explaining that I was being fined $60, the maximum fine allowed for a first offense, and that if I wanted to protest it, I could attend the next HOA meeting. Well guys, at least we know one person that apparently suffers from small man syndrome. I decide that I want to protest the fine, but noticed that the fine was due in 30 days and the next HOA meeting was not for 35 days. I opted not to pay until after the hearing and wrote a letter back to the HOA president stating as such. I go to the meeting and it's literally myself, the HOA president, the HOA secretary, president's wife, vice president, president's neighbor, and treasurer, vice president's wife. My protest was immediately overruled and I was also charged a $30 late fee for not paying on time, despite notifying them. I was fed up, I could not take it any longer, but realized I really did not have any recourse. About 4 to 5 months later, we give birth to our first child, and about a month after that I was driving home one night. I was working a second job in retail at the time, and my buddy in the military called me. He had been deployed when my daughter was born and was calling to congratulate me. When I got home, I did not want to risk waking up my sleeping newborn daughter, so I just sat in my car with the engine running as it was a little chilly outside. I sat there for about half an hour when I heard the police siren and saw the yellow lights. Now keep in mind, police sirens are not quiet and this was right in front of my house. His stupid yellow light was flashing everywhere, including into my daughter's bedroom. I got out of the car and rather rudely told him to turn off the light as to not wake my daughter. He explained that I looked suspicious, sitting in my car with it running outside of my house. I explained the situation and he told me I had to go inside and that my history of being a troublemaker would not grant me any leniency. I basically told him where I thought he could go and proceeded to sit on the hood of my car. He sat there for another 15 minutes telling me I needed to go in and at one point touched my shoulder. I explained to him that if he touched me again, I would take it as a sign of aggression and defend myself, which he responded by getting in his car and leaving. He circled the block about 4 times the next 30 minutes, which was when I got too cold to stay out and finally went inside. Next day, I get a hand-delivered letter from him and the vice president, and he also asks me to step outside to talk about last night's incident. He explains that he was being nice by not calling the police on me after I threatened him. At which point I cut him off and told him that he needed to go get off my property before I called the police on him for trespassing. I read the letter and saw that he was giving me 2 different fines for $180 each, which were the maximum amounts. One for violating curfew and one for disobeying the night watchman. I was done, I had reached my breaking point. This is where the revenge comes in. I start looking into HOA laws and regulations regarding fines and how to protest them because I felt like this was clearly abuse. I find that the law states that you must be notified of an HOA 10 days prior to closing on a house and must be served with the HOA rules within 45 days of purchase, or you are not subject to being forced to participate in the HOA. I remember that we were not served until after we moved in, which was close to 90 days after we closed. So I called my real estate agent, who is a very close family friend. My in-laws have bought literally thousands of houses from her over the past 35 years, and asked if she had the paperwork still, and she said she can get me a copy. I looked and it was over 90 days after purchase that we were notified, and there was no disclosure statement at closing. Realtor, or relator, I'm not sure, says she must have misplaced it because it is required by law to be provided prior to the sale, and basically that she would not miss something like that because it comes to her when they do a title inspect on the house whether or not there is a registered HOA. She does a little digging and calls me back 2 days later and says that my neighborhood does not have an HOA registered with the city or county, which is required. I end up calling the county office in charge of registering and give them the neighborhood name, and she says that our neighborhood is registered in the other city and not in our city, and that if we wanted to start an HOA we would have to follow these certain steps, and that without those the HOA would not be allowed to collect any money or have any authority. Apparently what had happened was our neighborhood was originally all in one city, but when the city lines changes, the neighborhood was split in half. The other neighborhood kept the HOA that was registered, and our HOA president was supposed to register with the state, but did not feel like jumping through all of the hoops that it required. I was ready to walk down to the president's house and rip into him, but decided to be smart for a minute. I talked to my neighbor across the street, who also hated the HOA, and told him what I found out. He was furious about it as well. We talked to a few more and get a group of about 10 of us together that agree we need to show up at the next HOA meeting. Word had apparently spread because there ended up being more people than the library meeting room could host. I had specifically asked to be the speaker for the group, which they were nice enough to let me do. The president tried to prevent me from speaking due to being overdue on my fines. At this point, I'm about 3 weeks late on my last set of fines with a $30 per week penalty on each fine, so my current bill is set to about $540. But I spoke anyway. I explained to them that I had contacted my in-law's attorney, also a family friend, who had drafted together a lawsuit regarding the fact that they were impersonating a registered HOA in order to collect money from us, which was fraud. The president dismissed me and said I had no idea what I was talking about and that he had enough of my antics. The staff members all left immediately while the rest of us stayed and talked. A month later, we served them formally, myself and 20 other homeowners, suing them for all fines and HOA dues we had paid, to the tune of approximately $50,000, as some of these families had been there over 10 years. The president and vice president got their own attorney who attempted to legitimize the HOA, but it required the signature of like 90% of the homeowners. They got 3 signatures, including the 2 of themselves. Some other old bitter hack signed. After that failed, they tried to settle by agreeing to abolish the HOA and showed that they had not financially gained from it and that all funds had been used for the park upkeep, snow removal and other neighborhood events. We took a vote and this was turned down in overwhelming fashion. I was surprised I actually voted to accept this. Then about a week later, one of the other families calls and mentions something about the park maintenance and snow removal. Apparently, he had given a quote to do the landscaping for the park, meaning cutting the grass, mulching, etc., and his quote had been a couple $100 cheaper than what they were paying, and that it had always bothered him because the person that did those jobs was the vice president's son, and that what they were paying him was pretty outrageous in terms of what's standard. Eventually, it went to court where the judge looked at everything and mandated that they pay $21,000, $1,000 per homeowner, plus attorney and court fees, which were like another $2,000 for a total of $23,000 in damages. Additionally, they were fined by the city's governing body after it was reported. I don't know how much that fine was though. We ended up selling the house that following summer, but I talked to a couple friends that still lived there about a year after it, and they said that the president and vice president both sold their houses and moved away because they were pretty much hated by everyone in the neighborhood, and that they had an informal HOA that people donated to for upkeep of the park. And yeah guys, if you have watched until here, please don't forget to post some star emojis in the comments and also like the video if you want to support me. By the way guys, I'm curious, do any of my viewers have to work during Christmas or even during New Year's Eve? Let us know in the comments, you definitely have my empathy. Or was it sympathy? I forgot. What I'm meaning to say is, I really feel for you guys because that is definitely not easy. The next one is titled, I joined the board of my HOA 3 years ago. Today we officially dissolved the board. Today was a good day. As a member of my 3-person board for my HOA, I helped officially dissolve our HOA. I bought my house 21 years ago. Admittedly, I was rather naive about HOAs and the nonsense about protecting your property values, etc. But I had a family on the way. It was a quiet and at the time rural part of the state I'm in, and it was a nice house at a reasonable price. So I figured, why not? I would only be there a couple of years and then I could sell and move on. For various reasons we stayed at the house. Those included the housing market crash where I was underwater on the house for a number of years and I wanted to avoid the uprooting the kids out of the school they were in, etc. During that time I watched some of the most effed up things happen all on the part of the board. First, selective enforcement of CC and Rs, which by the way apparently means covenants, conditions and restrictions, but please correct me if I'm wrong. So basically if they did not like you, you were targeted. No enforcement of any CC and Rs, the board did nothing, and a prior iteration of the board deciding to outsource to a property management company that embezzled thousands from the HOA. Looking back, that was probably the board that did nothing with respect to enforcement. So if I hate HOAs so much, why did I join? Well, because I figured I could not complain if I did not contribute. Then one day something really odd happened. I had multiple neighbors ask me if it was possible to dismantle the HOA. I told them, yes, but it's a lot of work. We need at least 2/3 of the homeowners to vote on ballots saying yes to dissolving the HOA. A no vote or not voting were the same thing. So the board agreed unanimously to put it up to a vote. We went door to door, collected signed ballots from each homeowner, answered any questions they had, including, well, what if people vote to keep it? We would reply, then the HOA stays. That's clearly what the homeowners want. And of course there was the, well, don't you care about your house value? We need an HOA. Of course we would tell people the same thing. If you think keeping it's the right thing to do, you should vote accordingly. In the end, it was clear the people living here, some of whom were the first buyers of the house and still living here from when the development was first put in, had had enough of dealing with the HOA. They all felt the same pain and frustration that I did. We got over 2/3 of the homeowners voting to dissolve the HOA. We will be working on filing with the state the results, filing the dissolution papers, etc. And honestly, the overwhelming majority of us could not be happier. Today was a good day. Well, it seems in case a neighborhood is not happy with their HOA, they can actually do something, but in the end I guess it comes down to whether or not you are friends with your neighbors or even if you know them at all. And that leads me to another question, which is, how well do you guys know your neighbors? Are you friends with them? Did you ever do something with them? Let us know about your neighbor relationships. And unfortunately guys, this has to be the last story for today. I hope you enjoyed the content, and if you did, please don't forget to like the video and give me some ripe stars. I hope you have a fantastic day and I see you again tomorrow.